chairs, but let's get started. Hi everyone, my name is Pierce and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series here at Brookline Booksmith and your host for tonight's conversation. I want to open up the space by saying thank you for coming out tonight. The Booksmith has been around since 1961 and that's because of our wonderful community. Your support means we can keep having events like this, so thank you again. As you may know, tonight's event is part of our ongoing Transnational Literature Series, which focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. If you enjoyed tonight's event, please check out our full events lineup online at brooklinebooksmith.com so you don't miss some of the amazing authors we have coming up this fall, both virtually and in store. You can also follow us on Instagram for updates. Toward the end of the event, we'll leave about 15 minutes or so for an audience Q&A, followed by a signing. We have copies of tonight's featured book available over at the register. And please take a moment to silence your cell phones. I think that takes care of the business end of things. Now I'd love to tell you a little bit about our guests. Tonight I have the very great honor of introducing Sam Wachman and Grace Talusan, here to discuss and honor the release of Sam's debut novel, The Sunflower Boys, a harrowing and gorgeous tale of love, identity, lost innocence, and survival set in a time of devastating war. The novel is a powerful and heartrending exploration of young queer love, the Ukrainian spirit, and a family's struggle to survive. Sam Wachman is a writer from Cambridge with Ukrainian roots. His short fiction has appeared in Berkeley Fiction Review and New England Review, among others. Before writing The Sunflower Boys, he taught English to primary school students in central Ukraine and worked with refugee families in Europe and the United States. And tonight's moderator, a beloved series favorite, Grace Talusan, is the author of The Bonnie Papers, which won the Restless Books Prize for New Immigrant Writing and the Massachusetts Book Award in Nonfiction. Her writing has been supported by the NEA, the Fulbright, U.S. Artists, and the Massachusetts Cultural Council. She teaches in the Nonfiction Writing Program at Brown University. I'm so pleased to have them here together in conversation. And now Sam and Grace.
Yeah, as is tradition, I'll go ahead and read an excerpt from the book. Pierce, you have such a good microphone voice. Give me a signal if you can't hear me or if you can hear me too much. All right, so this is an excerpt from the first chapter, and it begins like this. And it's from the perspective of the main character, who's a 12-year-old Artem living in Chernihiv, Ukraine. And I guess I will not give any more context. My brother Yuri belly flops onto our bed. I hate sharing a bed and a bedtime with him. My best friend Viktor is an only child and gets to stay up 2 hours later than I do. Sometimes he sends me texts late at night and I don't find them until morning. Our mama kisses Yuri's forehead and then mine. She turns the lights out and our door creaks shut. The day is over. Our bedroom is dark except for a thin sliver of light from the hallway. I pull the comforter up to my shoulders, shut my eyes, and lie on my side, facing away from Yuri. We always fall asleep like this, with me on the left edge of the bed and Yuri on the right, separated by a warm neutral zone of mattress and duvet. But usually I wake up in the morning with Yuri close to me, his arm draped across my chest. Toma, he whispers, a nickname only he's allowed to use. He bumps my leg with his foot. His toes are cold on the skin of my calf. I give up and roll over to face him. When he breathes, I smell the blue mint of his toothpaste. Tell me a story. Not now, it's late. I'm not tired. He bumps me with his foot again. Our father, our tato, always tells the same story, and I know I'm not going to win this argument, so I tell him that story. I stop the story halfway through when I'm sure he's asleep. I know when he's pretending and when he's really asleep because he always jerks once as he drifts off, as if he's driving in his dream and he just hit a speed bump. Then his whole body flares with heat. Sometimes Yuri is still small and an eternity lies in the 3 years that separate us. Still the squirmy bundle our father introduced me to at the very beginning of my life, the first pinprick of light in the murkiest depths of my memory. I remember our mama lying in the hospital bed with messy hair and a shiny face, our tato holding Yuri to his bare chest. Tato beamed at me and said, "Look, your little brother." I watched Yuri wriggle and cry and thought, this thing cannot possibly grow into a person. He only gets one big brother, Tato told me that day, so you have to promise to be the best big brother you can. Promise to love him and keep him safe. And I did. I promised. When Yuri was tiny and fat-cheeked, everyone fawned on him, even strangers. Mama and our grandfather would spend hours discussing whom Yuri resembled, attributing his facial features and the expressions he made when he needed to burp to various family members whom I had never met. I found myself vying for attention with someone who could not speak, a cow-eyed, drippy creature, fragile despite all his patting. Sometimes I loved him only because I promised our father. It became easier as he got older. One day, at the beach along the River Desna, I tried to teach him to stand on his head. The river was still dripping from our bathing suits. He toppled over every time. On his fifth try, I watched him teeter, his bare feet skyward. Just before he fell, I grabbed him by his ankles. He laughed, screamed, squirmed, begged me, "Let go, let me fall." But I held on. Now Yuri is old enough for Mama to slip 25 hryvnia in his pocket and send him to the market on his own to buy her an onion. We used to read picture books together, and I would help Yuri sound out words. And now, Yuri helps me with my math homework, which I'll never admit to anybody. Yuri is growing, and so am I. Sometimes we grow so quickly that we don't know how to adjust to each other. A few weeks ago, I swung open the kitchen cabinet, and the knob hit Yuri in the face. "Sorry," I told him, "your head didn't used to be that high." I look at Yuri now, and a weight settles in my chest. We'll keep growing and growing. We will grow up, and we will grow old. We will sleep in separate beds, separate bedrooms, maybe separate cities. We'll live with the families we created, not the one we were born into. I always knew this, in one way or another, but tonight, I know it differently than I've ever known it before, as if it's just around the corner, even though we still have years. The weight in my chest doesn't lift until the chirp and the edges of the curtain glow.
First of all, I want to say thank you to the Brookline Smith and also to Sam for asking me to be in conversation with you tonight.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Grace.
This is such an incredible honor and pleasure. Sam and I met because he was a student in my creative writing class at Brandeis University when I taught there, and you're not even graduated like that long ago. And so for you to have written such a beautiful, incredible book, and for me to hold it is like, it's such an honor for me to be in conversation with you.
It's such an honor for me to be in conversation with you. I think in other words, this is all Grace's fault.
No.
Grace was my first formal creative writing class I ever took, and she's such a wonderful, affirming, insightful teacher that I kept going. And now we're here, and it's the biggest privilege.
Thank you. Well, for folks who don't know, who haven't read the book yet, could you set up the premise, the setting, the characters? Tell us who will meet when we open these pages.
So the elevator pitch, if I can still do it, from back when I was pitching the book to editors, is that it follows the 12-year-old Ukrainian boy named Artem and his 9-year-old kid brother Yuri, living in the city of Chernihiv in the northeast of Ukraine. And it follows Artem. The first half of the book is during peacetime in Ukraine. And it's kind of a love letter to the version of Ukraine that I experienced when I was there, and kind of a love letter to Ukraine before 2022. And it's also a queer coming of age story. It's a story of Artem, who is wrestling with his nascent feelings for his best friend Viktor, and how that works and doesn't work in Ukrainian society. And then halfway through the book, right around here, the Russia invades, and the story takes a hard left turn, and that is, I think, all I'm gonna say. You have to buy it to read the rest.
Which you should definitely do. Tell us about the origin story, how you came to write this book.
I guess that story begins in like 1912 or so, when my great-grandparents came from Ukraine to the US escaping violence, because history repeats itself. And then if we fast forward about a century, I became very curious about those roots and about that experience, and I started studying Slavic languages at Brandeis, and I got involved. I wanted to practice my Slavic language skills. I wanted to learn Ukrainian to fluency. I liked to imagine that I could hold a conversation with my dead great-grandparents in their native language. And so I got involved with a school in the city of Vinnytsia in Ukraine, and I became their English tutor. Technically their English teacher, but I'm not a teacher. Honestly, it's a miracle that those kids can speak English at all. I think it's YouTube. And I found a really intense sense of community. You know, I went to Ukraine out of curiosity rather than out of some sort of ancestral affection, because my family had been driven out of there. And my own feelings, and I know that my grandparents' feelings were very complicated, and I went there with curiosity and expecting maybe some degree of alienation. And what I found was just a real sense of homeland and a sense of belonging. And so I fell in love with Ukrainian literature and the language, and I really loved teaching my kids and getting to know their families. And that is when I started writing the book. That's when I started the embryonic first draft that looks nothing like this and was called something different and was a totally different story. It was a slice of life sort of kind of impressionistic coming of age story. Nothing much happened, but I liked it. And I certainly wasn't going to show it to anybody. I didn't imagine that it would ever evolve into something published. But it was sort of a love letter from diaspora to homeland, if we can call it that. And I came back to the US, and there was a pandemic. I don't know if you remember. So I had to stay here for a while, and I was longing for this place. It was the first time I'd ever traveled abroad without my parents. It was the first time that I'd ever really, it was sort of my coming of age as well. Sort of this whole thing can be construed as kind of a Künstlerroman. And so I was in my childhood bedroom, longing for this place and translating the longing into prose. And I spent my last semester of college in Denmark. And when I was in Denmark, kind of my plan was to study there, finish up my degree, and then go back to Ukraine. And that was in January of 2022 that I came up with that plan. And then in February of 2022, Russia invaded. And my experience of that was very much through the lens of my kids' experiences, through their eyes. I had a conversation with one of my students, a 13-year-old student, on the evening of February 23rd, 2022. We were texting, and he was nervous because he had a chess competition the next day, and we chatted a little bit, went to sleep, and then at 4 in the morning I got a call from him, and he said, I'm in the basement. I think the chess competition's canceled. And so I put writing on hold for a very long time. I put writing on hold for a year. Writing felt frivolous. My story had changed. I wasn't even thinking about it. I kind of ditched my classes in Denmark. I did flunk that semester in a pretty spectacular way. I went down to, at the time, one of my best friends was living in Berlin, where a lot of Ukrainian refugees were coming through. They were coming through the train station there and then fanning out to different parts of Europe. And so I was volunteering there for a while. And I was going to meet my students wherever they were ending up. They were scattered to all the wind in Poland and in Romania and in internally displaced persons camps and such. And so that was my life for about a year. And I kind of ingested the atmosphere of war. And then the first anniversary of the war, so that's February 24th, 2023, I was volunteering at a camp for an educational camp for Ukrainian kids just over the border in Romania. And by some miracle, all of the kids that I had taught in Ukraine wound up there from all of the different countries that they had banned out to. And we hadn't seen each other in quite a while, and they hadn't seen each other in a year. And so we were having this really as magical of a time as you can have in Romania's 28th largest city in February. And they were trading stories, and I was mostly listening, and I said something like, you guys should write a book. And one of my kids turned to me and went, we're busy, you do it. So I took that as kind of a green light to continue with this, but I didn't know how to do it. I obviously couldn't continue this story, the slow-paced slice of life story that I was originally writing, but I didn't feel entirely equipped to write about war. And so that's how I guess this started. I did a lot of research, and I conducted interviews with friends, strangers, students, and then just decided, this war came out of nowhere for a lot of people, and also there were the lengthening shadows of Ukraine's acrimonious relationship with its neighbor, and I kind of wanted to portray the way that war can descend upon a place in a very sudden way, and especially if you're a kid and you're not watching the news and you're not really necessarily detecting, at least not directly, the increasing tension in the air, and then just have the narrative take a hard left turn, and so that's how this book was created.
And I'm just like thinking about everything that you said. There's so much there.
I did talk.
No, I mean just even like seeing your, ending up at this place and seeing all your students. I mean,
that was
after worrying about them and not knowing where they were.
I was very moved. It was such a relief for me. I let out some breath that I hadn't realized I'd been holding for a year. I had been busying myself I got involved with refugee relocation programs here and in Germany and in Denmark, and I was always in contact with my kids, but there was always this little alarm going off in the back of my mind. They're not my kids. I would have had to become their father when I was 9, but they felt like mine, and I think that's sort of where some of the protective relationship between Artem and his little brother Yuri comes from. It was cathartic for me to write that because I couldn't protect them.
So part of what goes on in this story is Artem, who's 12 years old, has a sketchbook and has this way of being able to process what's going on through art, through making images. And I just kept thinking about you as the writer, and your narrative, thinking about Sam writing this book and the parallels between you and Artem having writing or having art making as a place to go, when things are getting hard. And so I was thinking about, or asking you, how much of you is in Artem?
A lot. I mean, I think that's the short answer is a lot. I think that it's almost that I designed Artem so that I could relate to him better, so that I could inhabit his head. My mom's an art teacher, and I have also a lot of musicians among my friends and family. And I think that being able to find catharsis in some kind of creation, some kind of artistic pursuit is a way that I can understand a character. And so maybe it was a little bit of a shortcut to getting into Artem's head, but I didn't want to make him a writer because that's way too on the nose, and writers are insufferable anyway.
Very much.
And so I made him an artist. And that was the original conceit of the book, was a story told in 100 sketches, and I did not end up abandoning that conceit. That's still the structure of the book.
Yeah, so it's lovely. The chapter titles are the names of the images, but Sam doesn't show us the images. We have to imagine them, which I also love that choice too, that we imagine these like captions that you've written. So tell us about so you said a little bit about your relationship to the place and the people. What kinds of responsibility or pressure did you feel, especially given what happened about halfway through you thinking about this project?
Yeah, immense pressure. Some of which may be imagined, but pressure nonetheless. I think this was probably one of the more challenging ways I could have written a debut novel, because I'm writing about a country that is in most tangible ways foreign to me. And that I also feel some sense of kinship with / ancestral belonging to, but that's very fraught. And when the war started, and when I started writing about war, I realized that I have to write fiction a little bit like a journalist. I am now writing about real things that really happened to real people, and I should talk to those real people and talk about first off, what happened, and also how they would like it portrayed, because I think that when you write about these really intense subjects like war in fiction, it can come off as schlocky or exploitative. And I wanted to really stay on the correct side of this line. I wanted it to be that it didn't feel, if one of my friends who had experienced war crimes in Ukraine was to read my book, and they now have, I wanted them to feel that it was cathartic to read their experience rendered in fictionalized, rather than I was taking their experience and I was turning it into something that I was taking ownership of the narrative, and that would be sort of exploitative. And so it involved a lot of research, which I was really quite lucky. I had a lot of friends who were very excited about the prospect of me writing a book incorporating their experiences. There was a lot of, yes, please show the world what has gone on here, what we've been through. You internalize news in one way, and you internalize fiction in a completely different way, and maybe in a more emotional way. And there's been some amazing journalism in Ukraine, but the limitations of journalism are that you have to you have a sort of a fealty to the facts. And with this, I get to let emotions take the wheel a bit. And so I got one of those little recorders with the fuzzy mic that journalists have. And I recorded a whole lot of interviews with people who were, and this is where I'm very lucky, really candid with me, and really just there was a lot of patience involved. I do speak Ukrainian, but I am by no means a native speaker. And so going through these interviews and using words that I don't necessarily understand and writing them down for me, and simply just being very, very patient in relaying to me their trauma and giving it to me to use in my novel is an act of unbelievable generosity that I experienced repeatedly. And in probably the most intense of those, I had a conversation with a friend of friends who had escaped Ukraine by on foot illegally over the mountains, through the mountains, the Carpathians, and he brought a giant map of the Carpathians, and we went through every step of his route and discussed it. And that interview lasted maybe 5 hours.
That's incredible. I think about these things as well. I think about, I was born in the Philippines, but I was only there till I was 2 years old. But it is a place that I like to write about, and I like to write about my family there. Family actually that I've never met even. So there's a way that this place that people in my life, maybe even me, I call home, but I've never really lived there. It's really alive to me. But I do think about what is my right to write about? Is it okay that I write about these things? But like your student said to you directly, we actually can't do it right now. Maybe we can't do it for a long time for various reasons. You do it, you can do it. You're in a position to do that for us, and they trusted you too, and rightly so. I mean, it is a very emotional, moving experience to read this book. The relationships between the people, I mean, they're so tender and heartbreaking, but not, like you said, the word schlocky. I'd never think that word at all. I mean,
Thank you.
it's really deeply moving. These just tiny moments between folks, which are, yes, there's these big dramatic moments that happen in the landscape in the novel, but I'm really moved by the small moments between people that you
Thank you
get.
so much.
Yeah. So you actually answered so many of my prepared questions just by talking, but let's see. Well, can you say a little bit about the process of finishing the book? So you talked about writing it, then there's this whole other part. First you have to write it, that's very hard, and then there's this whole other world in life. What is the story of this becoming a manuscript to this book that's in front of us, that's gotten starred reviews, by the way, from Publishers Weekly and Kirkus?
Oh, that story begins with you, which I think that you know, but also I wrote my first short story in your class, and that ended up getting published. And through that short story, a early career agent found me and said, "Are you signed to anyone?" And I said, "Why would I be signed to anyone? I wrote the one short story. What are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, have you written anything longer, like maybe a novel?" And I said, "This is too much work. I could never do that." And I signed with her anyway, and she's fantastic. And when I eventually had a manuscript ready for her, I mean, it was really quite easy. She made it all very aerodynamic, but the process of actually writing it all down, it was 4 very caffeinated months. And I'm very nocturnal when I write. I like to be just, ideally in a sensory deprivation tank, but isn't super practical, especially with the computer. And
all
so,
that salt water,
yeah, not good. And so I was staying up pretty much all night. I put everything else on hold. I had a series of jobs that I left or got fired from because I was being a terrible employee, because I was really focused on this. And I suppose eventually I came to my agent Naomi with a first draft, and we volleyed first through 11th drafts back and forth for maybe 6 more months. And eventually we said, yeah, it's ready to go on submission to editors at various houses. And I guess that's the interesting part of the story. The only other interesting part that I can really say, because I think that the publishing process is much more interesting to other writers than it is to audiences, but the only other interesting part is that copy editing this was a bear, because there are so many Ukrainian words, and there's no one universally accepted transliteration standard into the Latin alphabet. Ukrainian uses the Ukrainian Cyrillic alphabet. And so we had to come up with our own set of standards, and that was probably in terms of just sheer time and brain cells, the most arduous part of the process.
Well, from my perspective, from the story that you told, I remember seeing that short story, that first one that you wrote, and for me, like when I see work, like a bell will go off and be like, oh yeah, this is good. Like this is, I mean, I don't like to use words like good and bad value judgments, but I saw it and I was like, oh yeah, this is it. Like you'll do it. And so sometimes you say the word luck when you describe like timing and meeting your agent and all this stuff. Okay, yes, a little bit, but also you have to be able to do the rest of it. Like someone opens the door for you and invites you through, but you have to actually walk through. So you wrote the draft, you wrote the manuscript, and you were presented with these opportunities and then you took them and ran. But I do remember seeing that in what you call like imagistic work. And yeah, I recognized it right away. I was like, yeah, this is it.
I appreciate
Yeah.
that a lot. I mean, I had the opportunity because of you and your class. I do think that there's a significant amount of luck. I think that there's a lot of talented writers out there, and I stood very much in the right place at the right time, and I'm very grateful for that.
So tell us about some of your hopes for the book. It's been out like just about a month or so, a month and a half. What are some of your hopes for this book being out in the world?
I think my hopes have already been fulfilled to some extent, insofar as I have received messages from readers about how total strangers and not people in the literary world who are being paid to say this, and not family and friends, but strangers who have talked about how they love my book and the specific things, the little Easter eggs that I included, and how they found those and how they appreciated that. And so I think that was my main hope, was that it would find the right people. And my hope, I guess, is that it continues to find the right people, because I think that there's more right people out there. And also my hope was that my students would like it, and they did. So that's my other hope.
So you've heard from them?
Oh yeah, we're still in very constant contact. I'm also trying to get to the U.S. or to Canada right now, because the door's kind of closed. But we're just still working very much together, less in a teacher-student way, more in like a ad hoc immigration attorney way, and also in a friend way, because they're like 16 now, and we're a little bit closer in age and developmental status.
Yeah. You had said something earlier about, putting writing aside when the world got your attention, when you had to respond to what was happening in the world. I think that's something that a lot of people probably struggle with, maybe even on a day-to-day basis if we're paying very close attention to the news, which is like, what do we respond to and what do we not respond to, and what do we do with our attention when there's so much that's constantly poking us to get our attention. And so I'll ask you, like, how do you deal with when you want to pick up and do artwork and writing, and how do you work with refugees and this other work that you do in the world?
Oh, I'm terrible at balancing it, and that's why I got fired from like a couple jobs. I think that I didn't balance it. I for like a year just did not even open the document, and almost came up. I had like a superstition against looking at it. I was like, it's like my computer's gonna melt if I look at it. But I think that now. It's weird because you talk to painters and they're never like, I hate painting, but you talk to writers all the time, and a lot of them are like, I don't want to write, I have to force myself to write, I have to strap myself to my desk. And I think that a lot of that comes from feeling like it has to come out really perfectly, and having this fear. I have this fear that I'm gonna be writing something that's in its worst, most first drafty, like embarrassing stage, and then I'm gonna get in a car accident and die. And they're gonna be, I wonder what's the last thing that he wrote, and it's gonna be awful. And
a very specific fear.
I think about this almost every time I sit down to write, and just for a moment, and then I remind myself, like, if I'm dead, I won't care.
This is kind of like the underwear thing. Like my mother, who's actually here, it was always like, you know, never leave the house without the cleanest underwear, because what if you get into a car accident again, and then what? And like, and then what? Like, if I'm in a car accident, like, there's other concerns besides dirty underwear.
So, you know, getting back to your question, I force myself to start typing something, and eventually it turns into writing. Even if I think that was something that you did with us in your class, was you would have us write for like 10 minutes, even if it was just nonsense words. And when I had trouble facing this down, I had a lot of trouble facing this down at different times, mostly because of like imposter syndrome and also being tired of it. You know, sometimes you've been working on it for a year and you're like, I don't want to start a new project. Like, I'm sick of this one. But each time I've sort of forced myself to open the document and at least write something. That's worked out well for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's another part of this, is being able to finish something. You know, like, it is fun to like fall in love with a new idea and a new project. That is really fun and appealing, but to go through everything and actually finish and do the copy editing, which, you know, that is particular to this book too, in the kind of alphabet that you're having to translate, like all the different steps. Like you got through the door, which is great. Okay, let me just do like one more question, and then we'll go to the audience. And we'll have time to talk with all of you. All these other questions. I wanted you to talk about family separation. I think you wrote about that so beautifully in this. I mean, in the novel, the father of the protagonist and his brother, like, he's far away, and this is a very common experience. And you write about it. I mean, there's this line on page 15 about the father. He left a 4-year-old and a toddler. And then when he came, I'm paraphrasing, but when he came back, those children were not there anymore. And I just thought, like, that was such a stunning, beautiful way of putting it. When people are forced to leave and be separated for various reasons, you leave something permanently. Like, of course, like, you can be reunited with your loved ones, but they're not the same folks that you left. So could you talk a little more about this experience and why that got your attention?
Yeah, that got my attention, largely because it's derived from real life. My students in Ukraine, almost none of them had fathers living in the country, because Ukraine is, I think, the poorest or second poorest country in continental Europe. And that was before the war, and it's been screwed over by history for centuries, and that's largely why. And because of this history, generally the fathers, sometimes the mothers, would go work in Poland, in Germany, sometimes even in the US, and then send home remittances, so that the rest of their family could have a decently comfortable life in Ukraine. And that was just something that really struck me, especially with the boys that I was working with, that they didn't probably grow up with fathers or uncles or really any male family member under retirement age. And that just, it did strike me, you know, there's a lot of angst and just longing there that's created by this bizarre artifice that we've set up of borders and having to have different economic conditions in different countries, and all of the difficulty that goes into, I guess, making the right choice for your family, even if it feels like the wrong choice when you wake up every morning. From the father, from Tato's perspective, you know, I doubt that in his gut he felt like, I'm glad that I'm away from my wife and my kids. I think that it's a rational decision, but also it's one that if I was in that position, I would have a lot of trouble making. And I think that when it's culturally normalized, it's probably just a little bit more obvious, but it's for me, it's definitely not culturally normalized. And even I think for any kid growing up without their father, it would be something very difficult.
Yeah, and this is a similar condition in the Philippines too, with overseas Filipino workers since I think the 70s, when the president at the time, his son is now president, made a policy so that the economic plan was people leave and then send remittances. It's the same kind of thing. So you do have, you know, most every family is touched by having a family member be away and earning money and sending it home.
And they're frequently working far below their skill level because they lack the qualifications they have the qualifications in their home country, they lack it in their receiving country. And so I've met countless doctors who are working here as cab drivers or And I think it's quite strange when it comes to medicine in particular, and that's why I made the father in this book a cardiologist, because Ukrainians and Americans have very much the same hearts, and I think that it's sort of people getting their identities and their purposes lost in bureaucracy is something that I wanted to lament a bit with this book.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we turn questions and comments over to the audience?
Okay, I'm gonna come around with the
Okay.
microphone.
I have not read the book yet, so I can't really make comments on the book, but I was just, because you talk about how, be quiet. So you talk about how art is really important to the main character. How did you decide on the cover design? Because I think a cover is almost as important, if not more, than the words themselves. Take this mic away from me.
I'm going to ignore the last part of your question. But I'm very glad that you asked the rest. I actually did not choose, but I got to choose more than most authors get to choose. So this book was published by HarperCollins, and they have their own team of artists that make the art for each cover. And I think this is unusual, I got to meet the artist that was assigned to my cover.
Yeah.
And she gave me like 3 different options. I went with an option that was almost like this one, but it had only one bicycle. And because the narrative focuses on a big brother and a little brother, I said, but can you, actually, this was my mother pointed out that it should have 2 bicycles, one big one and one small one. My mother, the art teacher, who's over there with the red hair. And so I feel really grateful for this cover, yeah.
Hello.
Hello, Alex.
Good to see you, Sam. I have read the book.
Thank you.
It's very good. And I recommend it to anyone who hasn't.
I'm going to read it.
And I think that, you've worked with many of these students, and I have a couple of Ukrainian kids, but one of the things that really strikes me is that this is a place where there's still a very rich oral tradition, where people really do come up on stories from their grandparents and aunts and uncles in a way that I realized I wished I had as I talked to them. And I want to know, so what I love about this book is that the first half is so much about stories. It's a story about Ukraine, and you're celebrating this land that's about to be destroyed by war. And I really want to know what didn't make it in. Like, what is the story you wished you could have fit into that first half about this amazing land, these incredible people?
I love that question, and I'm trying to come up with an answer that will do justice to it. The main, I kind of wish I had been able to write the original book, the one that was more a slice of life, because A, that would mean that there had been no war, and B, I really liked that book, and I think that's my main longing when I look at this book. I'm glad that it exists in the way that it does, and that I was able to tell the stories that I was able to tell, but also I would have, as a side project, to tell that first book, write that first book. The other thing is that a lot of this was born from my love affair with Ukrainian literature, and I used a couple of books, a couple of Ukrainian books, and I interpolated them with my own writing. And I wish I could have done more of that without it seeming forced, but I'll have to write a second book that has more. But what I have a lot of in this book, speaking of your observation about how stories are handed down in Ukrainian culture from generation to generation, I have a lot of my own grandparents present in this book who were born to Ukrainian parents in Canada. And I also have there's a story, it was made into a film, but it was by Kotyubinsky, and it was basically this epic tale of romance, sort of a magical realism, but for Eastern Europe, which was something that I had read 100 Years of Solitude in high school, and it had never occurred to me that that genre could be taken out of South America. And so I took that novel, which is called Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, and took some of the mythology, some of the mythical creatures, and some of the motifs from it, and sprinkled it throughout the book. And I think maybe 2 people have read Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors and then approached me and gone like, I got it, I saw it, I got the Easter eggs, I found it.
Satisfying.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm curious if you're going to stay with this theme of the diaspora and refugees and the challenges of trying to find some peace in a effed up world. Is your next book, if you do one, going to stay in that genre, or do you feel you want to reach out to something else, or just begun?
If you figured it out, please let me know.
Or maybe you have no idea.
I think it comes with a lot of responsibility. I think that even though I would never go, I am speaking for an entire people, I think that is how a lot of people will construe it, and that kind of haunts me. I loved writing this book. I don't know that I would approach the next one the same way. That's my really non-committal answer to you. Come back to me in a year, ask again.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Did your Ukrainian students read the book in English, or has it been translated, or will it be translated into Ukrainian?
Okay, so they read it in English. I translated scenes from it into Ukrainian for them because there is no Ukrainian translation yet. Those decisions are made by people who I have never met and will never meet at something called the Frankfurt Buchmesse, where a bunch of agents and a bunch of publishing houses, I don't know what they do, I imagine like a beehive, and somehow rights are sold. I'm really hoping that a Ukrainian publisher picks it up. I think that if I would be interested in a Ukrainian writing about America, so I'm hoping that Ukrainian audiences will be interested in an American writing about Ukraine. Estonian rights are being discussed because of a friend of a friend. That's all we've got for translation rights so far.
So going back to your writing process about how writers hate writing, I recently graduated from college and I also hated writing papers. I think I accidentally turned in a paper with the first sentence, "This is my first sentence," because I needed something on the page. But more than that, I hated going back to edit. And so I wanted to know if you had issues like forcing yourself to go back to what you've already written, with like the idea of there's still more to be said, more to be like changed, versus the whole like it has to be perfect when it first comes out.
So did I turn this off? No, we're good. Okay, so yes, I feel seen. My agent had to kind of hit me over the head with the message, it's done now. Don't go back and continue to edit it. Once this is published, I still want to edit it. I haven't read the whole thing through since it's become a physical book because I know there's things I will want to change. Something that you might not know about this whole process is that these blurbs on the back are not generally found by the publishing house. They're found by the individual author and their connections and their connections of connections. And one of the authors here, who was a friend of my professor, different professor, Andrew Krivak, I really recommend his work. The Sojourn was great. Yes, The Bear too. He found 36 typos in what was not the final draft, it was the galley, or the advanced reader copy. So it was like the second to final version. And he turned in his lovely words here with a list of edits and continuity errors. And I decided once that was over, because at this point it had been through my agent and my editor and my copy editor, and he was still able to find things to tweak. And I'm sure that if I looked hard enough, I would still be able to find things that will haunt me for the rest of my life. So I'm not looking.
Yeah, I'm coming over.
Hey there.
Hi.
First off, love the book, broke my damn heart.
Thank you. That was my goal.
So sorry. I actually had this question in advance of one of the previous ones, but I think so much of thought and feeling and culture even is transmitted through the very particular language that we speak. And so my question was, what do you feel would have been different about this book if you had written it in Ukrainian?
Oh, well, I don't think it would be as good of a book since I'm not a native Ukrainian speaker. But also, I do love the Ukrainian language. It would have been a fantastic fan project, but also probably not a publishable book. Like, I can hold conversations about most things, but also things like wordplay and extended metaphor and such can kind of be beyond me. And so I think that not much would have been gained and a lot would have been lost, but there's also Ukrainian writers who Ukrainian is their first language, and I really recommend reading them. Oksana Lutsyshina is one of my favorites. I'm thinking of others, of course, the works of Taras Shevchenko, Serhii Zhadan. I'm guessing that they have Serhii Zhadan's book, The Orphanage, at this bookstore. I'm getting nods from Pierce. Yes, go buy that as well. It's a really great book. And that's translated into English, but it was originally in Ukrainian. And I often think about, so I read that book before I spoke Ukrainian, and then I read it in Ukrainian, and then I read it again in English. And I realized how much I'd been missing the first time, and also how hard it is to translate literary fiction. I really admire what the translator was able to convey, and also I'm glad that I was able to experience all of it by reading it in the original.
Coming over. You guys are making me get my steps in today. Other sides of the room.
Hey, Sam. Hi. The last question that Grace asked about the parents leaving and then coming back to a different person, did you also have that experience when you left your kids and then you met them again years later? And were you able to sort of plumb those depths for part of the book?
Yeah, that was part of the catharsis of writing this. I think that I had left much more developmentally appropriate kids, and then the war adultified them in some ways, and then also stunted their growth in other ways. And obviously they were older, and so they were different because of that. And you know, all kids turn into mutants when they turn 13. But also, I think that it was obvious what damage had been wrought upon their psyches, and I was sort of mourning the versions of them that had been, and you know, the world that had been lost with that. And so that was also, and I tried to portray that also in Artem's character arc here. I think that we get not as much from Ukraine, although sometimes, but there are kids who come to the US from, for example, Central America, and they have been through really unspeakable things, and then they end up in schools, and the schools don't know how to deal with them and don't understand what they've been through. And that was one of the things that I experienced advocating for Ukrainian kids here in the US, who I hadn't known prior, but I understood they were probably very different kids before the war. And then the schools would go, well, they're having, you know, discipline issues. I'm like, they don't care about school right now. And so that was something that I also wanted to capture here. You know, the difficulties, the damage that war inflicts, it doesn't end once they land in a safe country and everything's hunky-dory. I think that is the beginning of the trauma and the displacement, and then you're having to do the hard work of adjusting to a new place, which is like, even if you were just moving as an adult from a peaceful country to another peaceful country, it's still hard. You're learning a new language, you're adjusting to, you don't have your friends and family there. When you're fleeing violence, it's an entirely different creature. And so that was something that I wanted to capture. And you know, my kids some of them are now back in Ukraine, some of them are in Poland, some of them are in the US, and seeing how they have both how that adjustment has damaged them, but also how it's just kind of changed them. I'm going to say that like a non-judgmental way, and sometimes even how it's changed them in positive and joyful ways. One of my kids, who is living in Boston, is now a really rabid Red Sox fan, and refers to himself as a Bostonian. And whenever he's asked where he's from, because he has a very thick accent, he'll go, "I'm from Boston." I think that's the best answer.
Any other burning questions? We do have a little more time. Here, I'll come up.
So I was just going to ask, this is a little bit of a follow-up to this question, and then we've heard a lot about like what you've experienced from the characters in your book. But now that you're an author and you're on evolution, you're on your evolution as an author now. Is there anything else about the particular characters you met inside yourself that came out in this book that are taking you to the next level? Like now you know more about whatever this reality is, right? From having written this book, and that's changed you. And so not really being able to maybe talk about like, what are you gonna write next? Not that, but like, as an artist, if you had those little pieces of paper and scraps of exciting ideas that are next, or what you're passionate about or thinking about next, or the little piece of candy, what would that be? Like, what are some of those things, if you want to share them? And just like, you know, now are you more of something different that you've written this book?
I think the easier question to answer is the second one, which is, am I more something different now that I've written this book? And that's a resounding yes, because I think having published a book sends the message, actually, what I write is worth reading. But more so, I now know how to write a book. So it's easier, it'll be easier to do it a second time. The idea of writing all of this is very daunting, and I was talking to a friend who is a prolific short story writer, but wants to write a novel and doesn't know how to even start. And it is a really frightening thing to stare down, which is why I was kind of justifying it in my head as this is going to be a series of short stories. This isn't, no one's ever going to read this, it's okay. And really, I think if you break it down into, like, this is like 10 short stories back to back, and then you kind of blend them all together, then it turns into one continuous novel. That's a much less frightening way to look at it. And so I think that I can go into the next novel feeling a little bit less frightened of the task ahead. As far as bits and pieces that I have from this novel that I want to use in the next one, I do have a document full of, like, I think it's called, like, use this. And some of it's just like turns of phrase that didn't, you know, were left on the cutting room floor, and some of it is just bigger ideas to explore, and I don't honestly know what all of them mean, because sometimes I get up at 3 in the morning and I'm like, type that down, and then the next, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, what did I mean by that? I hope that someday that will congeal into another book.
Any last burning questions? No? Wonderful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, both of you. That was absolutely beautiful and brilliant. I wanted to celebrate Sam's great achievement, and so we are going to have some champagne. So I hope you'll come. There's, you know, alcoholic champagne and then a non-alcoholic toast rosé that's got bubbles and is lovely. We're going to do a signing line. It's going to line up over where Sam is. We've got books in the back. I know there's a lot of you, so we'll start clearing chairs so that it's not too congested. But thank you all so much for coming out tonight.